All right. May peace and power elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. This your girl Tiffany coming through live in effect right here on the StreamYard. So if you are watching from my YouTube channel, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're watching from Facebook, go ahead and share this video. So tonight, I want to continue on part 3 of Africana psychology and philosophy. So what I'm going to deal with tonight is Africana psychology, and what I want to get into is what is Africana psychology and the association of Black psychology. So let's look up Africana psychology. And then also I want to talk about Afrocentrism. Okay. So so let's go ahead and look up Africana psychology. All right, check this out. All right, so Africana psychology is also known as Black psychology, right? So Black psychology, also known as African American psychology and African Black psychology, is a scientific field that focuses on how people of African descent know and experience the world. All right, the field, particularly in the United States, largely emerged as a result of the lack of understanding of the psychology of Black people under traditional westernized notion of psychology. All right. Overall, the field combines perspective from both Black studies and traditional psychology, encapsulating a range of definitions and approaches while simultaneously proposing its framework of understanding. In practice, Black psychology exists as both an academic and applied discipline, which focus on furthering the well-being of people of African descent through more accurate knowledge. Based on differing definitional system, developments in Black psychology tends to utilize a range of approaches. Overall, the field has contributed to developing Afrocentric models of research, therapy, and well-being, identifying inaccuracies in current psychological frameworks, furthering understanding specific to Black and African American individuals, and advocating for increased equity and appreciation of Black excellence. So the importance of Black psychology is to be able to understand the mindset of African Americans and understand the behavior patterns, right? That's the main purpose. But before I even continue on, let's look at what psychology is in general. So I'm going to read to you guys from this book right here. It's a textbook. It's an old textbook, but it's useful, okay? So according to this textbook, right, which is dealing with psychology, and this textbook it's a 4th edition. All right, so this textbook came about in 2006, but it's still prevalent. All right, so let's look at the origins of psychology. And it says, it's important to consider these historical issues for several reasons. First, students are often surprised at the wide range of topics studied by contemporary psychologists. Those topics can range from the behavior of a single brain cell to the behavior of people in groups. Okay, which is social psychology, because social psychology deals with individuals in a group. From prenatal development to old age, and from normal behavior and mental processes to severely maladaptive behavior and mental processes. As you become familiar with how psychology began and developed, you'll have a better appreciation for how it has come to encompass such diverse subject. Second, you need to understand how the definition of psychology has evolved over the past century to what it is today. The science of psychology, according to the textbook definition, is the science of behavior and mental processes. So psychology is dealing with the science of behavior and mental processes, right? It says, indeed, the history of psychology is the history of a field struggling to define itself. Let me read that one more time. In the history of psychology is the history of a field struggling to define itself as a separate and unique scientific discipline. The early psychologists struggle with such function issues as how should psychology be defined? What is the proper subject matter of psychology? Which areas of human experience should be studied? What methods should be used to investigate psychological issues? Should psychology include the study of non-human animal behavior? Should psychological findings be used to change or enhance human behavior? These debates help set the tone of the new science, define its scope, and set its limits. Over the past century, the shifting focus on these debates have influenced the topic studied, the emphasis given to particular areas, and the research methods used. Now, it goes on to say this: the influence of philosophy and physiology, right? It says the earliest origin of psychology can be traced back several centuries to the writing of the great philosophers. More than 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote extensively about subjects like sleep, dreams, the senses, and memory. He also described the traits and dispositions of different animals. Many of Aristotle's ideas remain influential until the beginning of modern science in the 17th century. Now, going back to what I said about philosophy, philosophy is the mother, or is the it's the mother of sociology. I mean, not sociology, excuse me. It's the mother of social science and science in itself. So you cannot have, without philosophy, you would not have psychology, sociology, or anthropology, or any form of science, but mainly, especially social science, because philosophy produce all these social science fields that we study. Okay, because remember, anthropology deals with the culture of the people, sociology deals with group interaction with the people, and psychology deals with mental behavior and social behavior of an individual. That's what it deals with. All right. So let's go ahead. But I forgot to do something real fast. See, before I continue on to read one book, I got to read this book by Baba Baruti right here, in Yasasim. This book written by Baba Baruti. Okay, I got to read it. How could I forget? Okay. Let's go ahead and read this real fast. Okay. So, Jinnah or Jannat are those special people have been tested in struggle or battle, demonstrated demonstrated extraordinary and unusual fearlessness, shown demonstration and courage in protecting his and hers land and culture and people, shown diligence and dedication to our people, produced an exceptionally high quality of work, and dedicated themselves to the protection, defense, and nurturance and development of our young by advancing our people, place, and culture. Nana Kaku, Brico, Ifabimi, Sangadere, also known as Wade W. Nobles. So it's interesting because Wade Nobles himself is a psychologist. So we're going to get to the list of names later, but let me continue on. In Greek mythology, Mentor is the adult male who Odysseus, the protagonist in the Odyssey, trusts to raise and protect his son, Telemachus, as he traveled the world in search of adventure. Mentor, however, apparently had plans that went far beyond the mere development of Telemachus' cognitive skills. His intentions as a Greek were naturally homosexual. Historically, in European culture, when boys or girls are left in the hands of adult males or females, they become their sexual victims. And this is what makes using the Greek term mentor extremely problematic for Africans seeking to maintain a heterosexual sanity. Okay, we give power to others in their ways. When we use their culturally peculiar terminology to define ourselves, those we honor, and by default, they're in our action in the performance of those roles. So Africans should use the term gender, not mentor, when honoring those particular Africans who unselfishly put so much of their energy into training our youth to be adult warriors, scholars. I am a gender. All right. So I had to go to the quote real fast. You know, I got to do my daily quotes. Somebody put Wade Noble also knows some Medu Neter in addition to other African languages. Well, that's interesting to know. That's very interesting. But let me go ahead and continue on reading about the history of psychology. All right. Now, let's see who is the founder of modern day psychology, Western psychology. He goes by the name of Wilhelm Wundt. By the second half of 1800s, the stage had been set for the emergence of psychology as a distinct scientific discipline. The leading proponent of this idea was a German physiologist named Wilhelm Wundt. Wundt used scientific methods to study fundamental psychological processes such as mental reaction times in response to visual or auditory stimuli. For example, Wundt tried to measure precisely how long it took a person to consciously detect the sight and sound of a bell being struck. A major turning point in psychology occurred in 1874 when Wundt published his landmark text, Principle of Physiological Psychology. In this book, Wundt outlined the connection between physiology and psychology. He also promoted his belief that psychology would be established as a separate scientific discipline that would use experimental methods to study mental process. And then goes on to say, a few years later in 1879, Wundt realized that goal when he opened his first psychology research laboratory at the University of Leipzig. Many regard this event as marking the formal beginning of psychology as an experimental science. And it also goes to say that Wundt defines psychology as the study of consciousness and emphasized the use of experimental methods to study and measure consciousness. Until he died in 1920, Wundt exerted a strong influence on the development of psychology as a science. 200 students from around the world, including many from the United States, traveled to Leipzig to earn doctorates in experimental psychology under Wundt's direction. Over the years, some 17,000 students attended Wundt's afternoon lectures on general psychology, which often include demonstration of devices he had developed to measure mental processes. So y'all might wonder, well, what was the purpose of reading that? Well, because we have to remember how to go back to the origin of psychology and what took place and how it became what it is today. So according to the book the founder of psychology, of modern day psychology, would be William Wundt. William Wundt was considered as the father of psychology, or the founder of psychology modern day, because he was actually a physiologist. Okay. And so he transitioned over into studying the psychology of a person. So I want to throw that out there, but let's go back and let's go ahead and continue where I left off. All right. So we're going to go ahead and look at the history real fast. And then there's some more information that I want to look into as well. All right. And it says, influence of African philosophy and origins of Black psychology. Ancient Egypt, in many ways, Black psychology today has been influenced by African philosophy of the past. The origins of Black or African psychology can be traced back as far as ancient Egypt or Kemet, around 3400 to 600 BCE. During ancient time, its earliest pioneer work concerned with the development of one consciousness and with the development and sustaining of positive relationship. Okay, so the earliest form of what we know as African psychology can be traced back with ancient Egyptian, because they study a lot of psychology. All right. Now, peace, brothers. And then it goes down to talk about the concept of ma'at. I didn't say that Wikipedia was always credible, okay? I got other sources besides Wikipedia, but I'm using it to be able to explain the details, all right? So I have other sources besides Wikipedia. Just hang on tight if you can stick around long enough. Anyways, peace, brother. How you doing? Anyways, going back to the point. People act like I don't have other sources besides Wikipedia. I cannot stand that. Okay, I hear you, but I got other sources besides Wikipedia. I got plenty information. Okay, but I'm just using this as a basic point to get to the detail. That's all. But thank you. Anyways, the concept of ma'at. One fundamental principle that came out this time period was ma'at, or how individuals' thoughts, emotion, behavior, and spiritual energy aligns with a principle of truth. This concept was thought to originate from Ra. Thank you, Divine. Thank you for explaining that. Listen to what Divine said. She is just using Wikipedia as a general reference to other reference. She is also using actual books. Thank you, Divine, for getting that. Thank you for explaining that. Maybe that will help to understand what I'm doing here. Thank you so much, Divine. Thank you. I'm so glad that somebody was paying attention. I'm so glad somebody was paying attention. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's what I do. All right. So before I continue on, because somebody came on here and said that, he was just breaking it down. That's all, brother. Don't take offense to it. Don't get personal, okay? He was breaking it down. So let me explain something if I have not explained it before. The reason why I use Wikipedia sources, all right, is not always because I think it's just 100% reliable. But what I do is because everybody likes to go to Wikipedia and get information from Wikipedia. So I feel like, okay, if you're going to use Wikipedia, also look up other stuff that is relevant. Okay. So what I do is I will go to, because it's the basic info that people like to go to. So I will go there and look up information, read the information from there, and then go down to show where the references came from. All right. But in addition to that, I don't just stick with the Wikipedia source. I also use other information to back it up. You see what I mean? So that's what I do. All right. That's what I'm doing, because that's what everybody like to I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people like to use Wikipedia. So I go to Wikipedia, just because it's a lot easier. But let me go ahead and continue on. All right. Shit. Anyways, So it says the concept was thought to originate from Ra, who was considered by ancient Egyptians to be the god at the time of creation. Ma'at was considered as a code of conduct and could be broken down into uh seven main virtues. It also believed that Ma'at absolutely requires social solidarity for its realization, highlights the importance of a cohesive community in the application of this concept. The seven main virtues of Ma'at are as follows: truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, order, balance, and propriety. All right. So, anyways, for a relationship to be sound, it was thought to need to represent and incorporate these seven virtues. This concept of Ma'at is thought to have existed in many African nations such as Egypt, Ethiopia, the Congo, Central Africa, African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, and South Cameroon and Gabon. Craig put, can't nobody on here debunk Wikipedia. They sourced up. You right, but sometimes, Craig, there's some people that can, put misinformation on Wikipedia, and I can understand what the brother was trying to say. So with that being said, sometimes there can be misinformation. So that's why you have to double check and make sure that the references is aligned with the source of information that's put on Wikipedia. That's all. So, but you do have a point. Majority of the time, you can't debunk Wikipedia because there's always references at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Then it goes on to say, it also believed that Ma'at serve as the rules by which both humans and Neteru or gods live by. In many ways, Ma'at can be simply understood as governing what is the right thing to do. These seven virtues also highlight community philosophical beliefs about what is necessary for a healthy and productive relationship. Okay, so there are also seven principles of Ma'at which are as follow. There is but one universal order. There is one cosmic order. There is only one measure. There is one cosmic law that precedes all spiritual laws. There is only one intelligence. There is only one path. All right. And there is only one reality. And within these seven main principles, there exists 42 divine principles, which in many ways are similar to the 10 commandments, in that they outline what is and isn't considered acceptable behavior. They also highlight the importance of unity within African societies, as there is only one cosmic / universal order outlined in these seven principles. And then it goes on to talk about psyche and soul. So according to ancient Kemetic beliefs at the time, the psyche or soul could be divided into seven related elements. Seven elements of the psyche and souls are as follows: Ka, Ba, Kaba, Anku, Seb, Ptah, and Atmu. The first is Ka, or the physical structure of an individual's humanity. Ka is also thought to encase all the seven elements in many ways. The second is the Ba, or breath of life. This element was believed to originate from the creator and ancestors and reside in all individuals. The third element is Kaba, or emotions and motions. In this cultural context, motion referred to the natural rhythmic order of things. The fourth element is Aku, or the capacity for thought and mental perception. The fifth element is Seb, or the internal soul. This particular element was thought to be time bound, meaning it was thought to develop around adolescence and was thought to be related to the ability to reproduce. The sixth element is Ptah, or the union of the brain with the conscious mind. The seventh element is Antamu, or the divine or eternal soul. All of these elements are interrelated in many ways, representing the interaction between humans and the divine, which is critically to many African beliefs. All right. So far, um, with that information, it goes on to say that, psychology, African psychology, as we know, can go as far back as ancient Egyptian, and it deals with the principle of Ma'at. Not only the principle of Ma'at, but also the 42 laws of the 42 divine principles, and they also got the 7 elements. So just to give a little basic outline, so let's go ahead and let's see what else we can find real fast. All right, so real quick, we're gonna look at the development of Black psychology, and then I'm gonna show you some sources afterwards. I'm gonna get into the Black Association of Psychology and stuff like that. All right, so here it is. Development of Black psychology. Following the end of the Civil War, a push for education began to occur in the Black community, moving away from the secret. Let me highlight this. Moving away from the secret night schools during the time of slavery, a variety of learning centers and college began to open. Many of these schools were established by missionary association and various freemen society. Federal government land grants such as the Morrill Act of 1862 helped to support these institutions, and the additional aid of religious domination allowed for the support of these schools. The years following saw the founding of Black colleges across the country, including notable institutions such as the historically Black College, Lincoln University, Fitz University, Howard University, Morehouse College, and Spelman College. By 1940, there were more than 100 Black colleges in the 17 southern states, offering a variety of degrees, with many of the earned degrees in social science. And then check this out. It says right here, the first African-American man to receive a PhD in psychology was Francis Sumner from Lincoln University in 1920. The first African-American woman to receive a PhD in psychology was Inez Beverly Prosser from the University of Cincinnati in 1933. Prestigious universities like UCLA, Cornell, and Harvard, just to name a few, did not offer African American students the opportunity to receive a PhD in psychology during the 1960s. The first psychology course at Howard University was not offered until 1899 and was listed as psychology, the briefer course. This was the only course offered until 1906. The Department of Psychology was not developed until 1926 by Francis Sumner. Okay, and let's find out who he was real quick. So, Francis Cecil Sumner was an African-American leader in education reform. He is commonly referred to as the father of Black psychology. He is primarily known for being the first African-American to receive a PhD in psychology. He worked closely with G. Stanley Hall during his time at Clark University, and his dissertation published in Pedagogal Seminary, which later became the Journal of Genetic Psychology, focused on psychoanalysis of Freud and Adler. All right, so according to that, Francis Sumner was considered as the Black father of psychology, and he was one of the first he was the first African American to receive a degree in psychology. All right, so let me go ahead and go back. So then it goes on to say psychology courses became both popular and integral courses in black colleges, with at least one course appearing as early as 1906. Formally trained professors, both black and white, taught courses, although many universities had programs of great influence. The most prominent was located at Howard University. Howard's success were due largely to the efforts of Francis Cecil Sumner, often considered the father of black psychologists. Sumner structured the psychology program, teaching not only the ideas of Edward Tetner, Johnson Watson, and Seymour Freud, but a myriad of courses in topics such as learning, personality, mental hygiene, and experimental psychology. Experimental focus reflected Sumner's three objectives: to provide students preparation in professional fields, stress the cultural significance of psychology, and prepare students who wish to pursue graduate study. This not only made Howard different from other black universities, but created a strong program that carried over to graduate studies. Although Howard only offered, went on to pursue doctoral degrees. Somebody put primary source and secondary source should be trusted if properly put in context by the researcher. Absolutely, yes, I agree. I agree with you, Craig. Do you want to be the first? You know what? We can discuss about that later. Just inbox me, and we can go in details about that. So, I was thinking of doing something like that, but yeah, just go ahead and inbox me, and then I'll discuss more in detail with you. All right. Okay. So, all right then. Now let's go down here to the part about scientific racism. It says the concept of scientific racism has been presented throughout history and often manifests itself in different ways. Historically, psychology has been influenced by other fields such as anthropology and biology, beginning with the idea that people could be classified based on race. This quickly gave way to psychological and biological theories describing a natural hierarchy among different races. On the very bottom of this hierarchy was black people and other marginalized people. Entire fields arose from these views, such as phrenology, phrenology was considered as pseudoscience because phrenology say that, hey, based on the size of a person's brain, you can tell who is intellectual and who is not. And that was considered to be pseudoscience. But we'll go into phrenology later, which was the study of cranial shape and size and their relationships to mental abilities. These studies conclude that black people's skull and brain were smaller than and hence inferior to those of Westerners. In addition, other scientists like Isidore Saint Hilaire studied facial structures and concluded that black people's facial structure was more ape-like. But then, you know what's funny? Okay. But you know what's funny, right? They say they're out being sapiens and studying other hominids. They realize that all humans, because that is the progenitor. Okay, cool, brother. That is the progenitors of the Homo sapiens and other hominid groups, right? So this is where they was wrong. So they tried to measure the intelligence, and we talking about the Europeans, psychologists. They tried to measure the intelligence of black people based on the size of the brain and the size of the skulls. It gets interesting though. Okay. But yeah, getting back to what I was saying before, it gets interesting though because it wasn't that black people did not have the intellectual ability. It's just black people dealt with things from a different cultural ideology. So that's where the ethnoscience come in, because black people were more lateral than linear. When I mean lateral, that means we were more creative. We were able to use our creativity to be able to understand things that deals with the academia. So like Ifa, for example, Ifa is a science. Okay, it's not just a spiritual thing; it's also a science. Because while you dealing with mathematics in Ifa, you deal with mathematics, you calculating, and also they have what's called African fratical. I believe it. If that's what it's called, African fratical, which deals with patterns. All right, so you have that, and also when you look at the cloth that people wear, like the kente cloth and all that, those are dealing with patterns. So that's how African people operate. They operate from a lateral point of view. They were very creative, and then the Europeans did not understand that. They did not understand our people very well. So that's why they assumed that. But let's go ahead and continue. All right. Ooh, Jesus Christ. Let me make sure everything's cool. All right, so I'm back. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so now it says these studies conclude that black people's skulls and brain were smaller than and hence inferior to those of Westerners. In addition, other scientists like what I say, Isidore Saint Here studied facial structures and conclude that black people's facial structure were more ape-like. Pseudosciences like these led to the belief that Westerners were physically, mentally, and intellectually superior compared to black people. Psychology has also adopted many prominent uh, nativist approaches, such as Darwin's theory of evolution, Galton's theories of hereditary intelligence, Mendel's theory of inheritance, Medal instance theory. This led psychology as a discipline to place a lot of emphasis on the idea that both of physical and psychological traits are inherited, thereby perpetuating the negative beliefs and stereotypes about black people. Among these stereotypes, one of the most frequently studied area was intelligence. Psychologists like George Oscar Ferguson and Peterson concluded that black children had defects in abstract thinking. Black children had defects in abstract thinking. But guess what? Black people were abstract thinkers. Because again, it goes back to understanding spirituality and creativity. But let's continue. And were overall less intelligent than white children. Importantly, this approach also takes away the importance of understanding other factors such as stereotype threat that could influence intelligence measurements and other psychological traits, which is important in studying black psychology and psychology in general. All right. So yeah, that's how black psychology came about. So we're gonna look at the origin of or the organization in Black psychology. Hold on. All right, so down here it says organization in Black psychology. In 1968, the Association of Black Psychologists was formed as a protest towards the American Psychological Association lack of interest in African American psychologists. In 1974, the Association of Black Psychologists created the official journal called the Journal of Black Psychology. This journal is directed towards understanding of experiences and behavior of African American population. It covers many issues in the African American society, such as HIV, sickle cells disease, racial identity, African American children, and substance abuse prevention. Psychology fields that are covered in this journal are counseling, clinical, social, cognitive, educational, and organizational psychology. All right. So check this out. It says predominant contributors to Black psychology. And here it is, the list, the founders of Association of Black Psychologists, which I'm going to download in a minute. You see all the names: Dr. Joseph Akwar, Dr. Calvin Atkinson, Dr. J. Dunn Barnes, Sylvia Obravich, Dr. Ronald Brown, Dr. Ed Davids, and then Dr. Robert Williams. And we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Robert Williams and the whole concept of the bitch test. All right. Dr. Aubrey Spencer was an Escofree, a founding member of the Association of Black Psychology. She earned her BA from Columbia, her MA from Columbia, and her a PhD from University of Connecticut. Okay. Then you got Robert V. Guthrie. Then you got Reginald Leonard Jones. Then you have Wade Nobles, right? A philosopher and psychologist who focused on African-centered education, healing, and spirituality. He was also a founder and past president of Association Black Psychology. Robert Lee Williams II. All right. And then it got the Trailblazers, as you can see. Stereotype of white nationalism thinking is a weak argument in psychology today. Too much philosophy, art is culture, and abstract is great in child development. Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. Yeah, art is the way of being able to have a perception on reality, being able to understand reality. So you understand reality using your creativity. And children are very creative people. They are very creative because they use their imagination, which helps them to be able to understand the world around them. So they may not be able to get a full understanding, but they get the basic understanding of things. All right. So, and it also goes down to the African-centered psychologists and philosophers. Naeem Akbar, Malif Kinte Asante, Kwame Gake, John Samuel Mbiti, right? Nara Sadar Kasa. And then you got some more names on here. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and all right. So I'm going to go ahead and present some more information, and I may play a video. And also there is a book. Let me see. Hold on. There's a book. The Association of Black Psychologists. Let me. Let me look up the book because I wanted to get that book so bad. Y'all don't understand. Okay. Let me put that book up. All right. So here's the book. It's called The History of the Association of Black Psychologists. I know that Dr. Francis Cress Welsing was in this organization, and I also know that Dr. Amos Wilson was a part of it too. So yeah, but that's the book. And then there was another brother. He wrote a book. I think his name is what was the brother's name? Let me look his name up too real fast. I think his name Dr. This brother right here, his name is Dr. Kobe Kaban. That's his name, Dr. Kobe Kaban. So he had passed away sometime, well, it was a few years ago. But yeah, he wrote a book. He wrote a book called The African Personality in Americas. So I might play a little bit of his video later. But yeah, this is the PDF right here. You can look it up, Association of Black Psychology.org, and it gives you the Association of Black Psychologists founders. Their names is on here. Okay. These were the founders. All right. So now let's see, where do I go from here? Let's look at an article. It's called African Studies Association. And it deals with African studies at historically black colleges and universities. All right. So it's published by African Studies Association, and you can find this up on www.jaster.org, www.jaster.org. Okay. And then let's go down to where it says African Studies at Historically Black Colleges and University, written by Herschel S. Chandler. Mm-hmm. Yes, he was. Absolutely. Many people see what it is that Dr. Amos Wilson, he was very broad when it came to psychology. See, when you study Dr. Amos Wilson, you got to have a open mind. You have to be able to think critically, because he's going to take you to that critical point. He's going to make you think. And also another brother is what's his name? Neely Fuller. Neely Fuller is another one that's very critical. So like when you listen to Neely Fuller, you have to be able to have a strong open mind. You have to be able to process the information and break down. But Dr. Amos happened to be one of my favorites to listen to, because his information still applies to what's going on today. Yeah. But down here, so I'm on the article and I'm going to highlight it. Okay. Right here it says Black Power, Afrocentrism, and Multiculturalism. All right. So it says, meanwhile, events in both the South and the North led to more assertive Black movement. Frustrated by the attitudes of some of the whites who had gone South to join the civil rights movement rather than seek racial reform in their own community. Stokely Carmichael, a voter registration worker for the Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, called for Black Power. The more striding tones of the Southern civil rights movement also can be attributed to increased violence against blacks as they sought to exercise their rights to vote in the Deep South. In North, in the North, blacks became more assertive as they encountered unfriendly and even hostile environments at some of the predominantly white institutions they attended. Consequently, Black students in northern colleges and universities began to call initially for Black study programs and subsequently a more Afro-centered curriculum in the late 60s and early 70s. This more aggressive posture with its non-negotiable demands was part of a broader in-your-face political style also characteristic of the Vietnam anti-war movement. Then it goes on to say the assertiveness affected the African Studies Association, the main professional organization for Africanist scholars, at the annual ASA meeting in Montreal in 1969. African Americans and some African protests against the underrepresentation of African Americans in leadership position in the association, the continued practice by some a Africanists of undertaking intelligence work for the U.S. government in Africa, and the unwillingness of the organization to make pronouncements on major political issues affecting the African continent. Many African Americans voted from the ASA to form the African Heritage Studies Association in 1969, a research organization dedicated to ending the Eurocentrism of African studies. As a result of this rupture, African Americans lost a generation of budding Africanists to Black or Africana studies. Most of the African American who left the ASA in 1969 have now rejoined but still support the AHSA, which is the African Heritage Studies Association. All right. And so, and going down a little further, right, in this article, it says, despite the greater access African Americans have to other higher educational institutions in the United States. According to information provided by the National Center for Education Statistics, as recently as 1994, HBCUs produced 48% of the African Americans receiving bachelor's degrees in agricultural and natural resources, 45% of those graduates in mathematics, 44% in physical sciences, and 40% in biological sciences, and 38% in education. And it's also go on to say 37% in computer and information sciences, a clear indication of the continuing focus on fields of study that led to obvious employment is that fact during 1993 and 1994, 46% of all doctorates conferred by HBCUs were in the field of education. However, the scope of graduate degree programs in HBCUs is expanding. In 1976 and 1977, Howard University, Atlanta University, and Mary Medical College and Texas Southern University were the only four HBCUs that awarded doctorates. By 1993 and 1994, 15 HBCUs awarded such degrees. So, it pretty much goes into how, African psychology and African studies, right? African psychology influenced what we know today, African studies, Black studies, and the HBCUs. So, and then also the Afrocentrism. So again, if you want to look up more information, here's the article right here, African Studies Association. Okay. You can look it up if you want to find out more information. All right. So now let's go ahead and look into Afrocentrism. So since we're on this topic, I love Neely Fuller philosophy on white supremacy with Amos Wilson. Amos said we should deal with each other like white people don't exist. Yeah, Amos Wilson was something, he was something serious. And him and Neely Fuller together, they something serious. So what many people don't know, that Neely Fuller was the teacher of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. He was her teacher, right? He was her mentor. So she learned a lot from him. Yeah. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and continue with the article. All right. Let me try to extend this out just a little bit. Just a little bit. There we go. Okay, then. Oh, boy. Afrocentrism. So what is Afrocentrism? Okay. Now, it says, for the study of African culture and history, see African studies. Afrocentricity, redirect here for the book, see Afrocentricity book. All right. So check this out. It says Afrocentrism or Afrocentricity, as we know it today, is a cultural ideology or worldview. It is a cultural ideology or worldview mostly limited to United States that focuses on the history of Black Africans. It is a response to global Eurocentric Orientalist attitudes about African people and their historical contribution, and revisits their history with an African cultural ideological focus. Afrocentricity deals primarily with self-determination and African agency. All right. And right here it says, where did I stop at? Okay. Let me go back. So, okay, I did stop at attitudes by African people and their historical contribution, revisit their history with African cultural and ideological focus. Afrocentricity deals with self-determination, African agency, and is a pan-African ideology in culture, philosophy, and history. So now what you guys don't know, that Pan-Africanism was influenced by African psychology. Yeah. Pan-Africanism was influenced by African psychology or Black psychology. As a matter of fact, it was the earliest form of Black psychology, because Pan means all and African means the people of African descent. So you talking about the African in the diaspora and the African in the continent. So it focused on the political aspect and the social consciousness of the African people around the world. That's what Pan-Africanism dealt with. Ooh, boy. Well, all right, now let's go. It says Afrocentrism, right, can be seen as an African American inspired ideology that manifests in affirmation on themselves in Eurocentric dominated society, commonly by conceptualizing a glorified heritage in terms of distinctively African foreign origins, where foreign is anything not indigenous to African continent. All right. Then it goes on down here to say it often denies or minimizes European cultural influences while accenting historical African civilization that independently accomplish a significant level of cultural and technological development. In general, Afrocentrism is usually manifest in a focus on African American culture and the history of Africa, and involves an African diaspora version of an African-centered view of history and culture to betray the achievements and development of Africans who have been marginalized. All right. So check this out. What is today broadly called Afrocentrism evolved out of the work of African American intellectuals in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but flowered into modern form due to the activism of African American intellectuals in the U.S. civil rights movement and in the development of African American studies programs in universities. In terms of Afrocentrism as a distinct academic ideology reached its peak in the 1980s and 1990s. Today, it is primarily associated with Malifi Asante. All right. So that's the history. And then let's go into the term right here. It says the term Afrocentrism dates to 1962. The adjective Afrocentric appears in the TypeScript proposal for an entry in Encyclopedia Africana, possibly due to W.E.B. Du Bois. The abstract noun Afrocentricity dates to the 1970s and was popularized by Malifi Asante. Afrocentricity, the theory of social change, in 1980. All right. Then with that being said, right here, it goes in, talk about Afrocentrism has its origins in the work of African and African diaspora intellectual in the late 19th and 20th centuries, following the social change in the United States and Africa due both to end of slavery and the decline of colonialism, following American, African, and Western Asiatic influence on ancient Greek culture. All right. So if you want to look up more information, just look up Afrocentrism. And you will see the references at the bottom. Okay. And it's coming from see, that's the source right here. All right. Afrocentrism. Okay. So let's see. What else can I use? Okay, so this book right here is called The Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. All right. Now, it has empirical studies, literature reviews, theoretical articles, methodological articles, case studies, other types of articles. All right, and then goes down to ethical reporting of research results, data retention, and sharing, duplicate, and what's it? Publication of data, plagiarism, and self-plagiarism. Oh, rights and confidentiality of research participant and conflict of interest. So it has a lot of information on here, but I'm not gonna go too far into details. Let's see. Let's look up something here. All right. Okay, so right here, it basically goes into how psychologists deals with scientific research and how what they looking for and what they studying. So like what's the main purpose of their research and how they go about studying the research and like the data collection, etc. So, all right, right here, writing for the behavior and social science. So I'm gonna read this. I'm gonna read these first two right here. It says research is complete only when the results are shared with the scientific community. Although such sharing is accomplished in various ways, both formal and informal, the traditional medium for communicating research result is the scientific journal. The scientific journal is the repository of the accumulated knowledge of a field. The findings and analysis, the success and failures, and the perspective of many investigators over many years are recorded in the literature. Familiarity with the literature allows an individual investigator to avoid needlessly repeating work that has been done before, to build on existing work, and in turn to contribute something new. Okay, just as each investigator benefits from the publication process, so the body of scientific literature depends on its vitality or vitality on the active participation of individuals investigators. Authors and scientific articles contribute most of the literatures when they communicate clearly and concisely. In this chapter, we discuss several considerations that authors should weigh before writing for publication. Consideration both about their own research and about the scientific publishing tradition. We begin by identifying the types of articles that appear in scientific journals. In the rest of the chapter, we focus on overarching ethical and legal standards in publishing that must be addressed as a first step in planning in investigation. So there's a lot that goes into dealing with psychology. It's just more than just, being analytical and having observation. Like you actually have to do a field research, and you have to be able to have enough participants to make sure that your research will be more accurate and more valid. So you should be able to get enough participant, involved to whatever subject you're trying to deal with, and then you should be able to come up with, the data reports, conclusion, and all that based on those participants. All right, and then it goes into details about the types of articles. Okay, so right here it says types of articles, right? And this is the APA Manual 6th edition, by the way. It was written in 2010. Okay, it says types of articles. Journal articles are usually reported of empirical studies, literature reviews, theoretical articles, methodological articles, or case studies. They are primary and original publications. Members of the scientific community generally agrees the characteristic of these publications are that articles represent research not previously published, first discourse for a discussion, or duplicate publication. See section 109. It says articles, communities of researchers. These articles focus on methodological or data analytic approaches and include empirical data only as illustration of the approach. Methodological articles are present at a level that makes them accessible to the well-read researcher and provide sufficient detail for researchers to access the applicability of the methodology to their research problem. Further, the article allows the reader to compare the proposed methods with those in current use and to implement the proposed methods. In methodological articles, highly technical material derivations, proofs, details of simulation should be present in appendix or as supplemental materials to improve the overall readability of the article. So again, all right. So again, this is called the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association, and it's the sixth edition. Okay. See, there we go. All right. There's the information, and it was written somewhere in. Let's see what it says. It came out in 2010. So yeah, 2010. That's when the publication came out. It's a good book to show you how psychology normally works and how it goes by dealing with scientific methodology and things like that. So, um, yep. All right. So the next one is critical analysis of African-centered psychology from ism to parasis. Hmm. All right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the example. It says it's written by A. Ibede Indi, California Institute of Integral Studies, St. Francisco, California. And then it goes on to say, the question of an African identity. There are opposing views about the existence of an African identity and the nature of African-centered psychology. Africa is a continent of 54 countries, and each country has its own tribes and cultures. It is not then possible to describe an African-centered psychology that represents all Africans. However, in order to understand the conversations around the idea of African-centered psychology, it is necessary to define related concept. A quick search of the term African center redirects one to the notion of Afrocentrism, Afrocentricity, or Africology, which is the study of Black African, African American, Africana, or Afro American. All right, so and then let's look at the critique of Afrocentrism. Hmm. All right, it says, all right, so let's look down here where it says critics. So it says critics argue that Afrocentrism as an ideology offers little more than a psychological and therapeutic feel-good together philosophy, or a new reconstruction of world history full of historical historical myths and legends. Warn Afrocentrists not to demonize categorically all white people, vilify European heritage to the point that Europe was epitomized all the evil in the world, and that gross overgeneralization and using factually and incorrect material is bad history and bad scholarship. It says, despise the critic's opinion, Afrocentrism is an important aspect of Pan-African conversation about the identity and the relevance of the knowledge of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora. So, anyways, you can look this up. It's called A Critical Analysis of African-Centered Psychology from Ism to Parasis, right? And follow this in additional work at which is digitalcommon.ciis.edu. There you go, right here. philosophy, part of the philosophy commons, psychology commons, religions commons, and sociology commons. Okay. It says Article 9, International Journals of Transpersonal Studies, California Institute of Integral Studies, right? And it was written on January 1st of 2016. All right, there we go. Okay. Then we got some more information. So this one is dealing with the articles, the history and vision of African American psychology, multiple pathways to place, space, and authority. Bertha Garrett Holiday, American Psychological Association. All right. All right. So in this article, that's the title. All right. So then it goes on right here. Let me Okay, let me go right here where it says the Great Depression. Okay, the Great Depression of the 1930s and New Deal strategy of President Franklin D. Roosevelt administration were especially significant for psychology in general and the nation's small number of African American psychologists. During the Depression, about 40% of members of the American Psychological Association were unemployed. This, coupled with the depression scope of human misery, caused many psychologists to recognize the social economic factors affected behavior that social issues, problems, and attitudes should be subject of psychological theory. Oh my. Okay. All right, give me a second, you guys. I'm waiting for the article to reload back up. All right. So where did I stop it? Hold on. Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Hold on. I'm trying to get back to the article. So I'm trying to see where did I go. Okay. Now I know where I'm at. Okay, right here. So let me read it again. Okay, the Great Depression of 1930s and the New Deal strategy of President D. Roosevelt administration was especially significant for psychology in general and the nation's small number of African American psychologists. During the Depression, about 40% members of the American Psychological Association were unemployed. This, coupled with the depression scope of human misery, caused many psychologists to recognize that social economic factors affect behavior, that social issues, problems, and attitudes should be subjects of psychological theory and research, including prejudice and purported racial differences. All right. And then it goes on to say, in turn, such assumption supported the emergence of a distinct anti-racism perspective in psychology that emphasized such themes as the attribution of racial differences to environmental differences and race as a social construct. This perspective marked a formal and progressive challenge of scientific racism perspective in psychology of innate racial differences. However, over time, this anti-racism research, which most frequently involved racial comparative research paradigm that subtly promoted assumption of white superiority, resulting in equally troubling alternative explanations of the behavior of people of color characterized by emphasis on damage, deficiency, and deprivation that were often portrayed as irreparable. And it says the depression's economic devastation of African American communities with a relatively small leadership class called some private foundation, along with which is, for example, the Rosenwald Fund and the General Education Board, along with the various New Deal programs to provide both higher educational opportunities and jobs for a small but growing number of social scientists of color, including psychologists. This served to help strengthen an emerging institutional base for African Americans in psychology. According to Kennedy, by 1936, Black colleges had a total of 88 psychology faculty, although most of these were European Americans. Ooh. At the 1938 meeting of All Black American Teachers Association, a division was organized for ATA members' interests in teaching and application of the science of psychology in related fields, particularly in Negro institutions. Okay. All right. All right, then, and then right here, it goes on to say much of African American psychologists. Okay, we're dealing with the professional association and scientific society context. Efforts to ensure their place in psychology, occupational and organizational structure, and collegial networks were enacted in the context of professional and scientific associations and societies. The following are limited overviews of African American psychologists, progressive strategic efforts and associated outcomes in four psychological association and society: the Association of Black Psychology, the APA, the American Counseling Association, and the Society for Research in Child Development. This discussion of original context describe major challenges, okay, strategies, initiatives, and outcomes of African American psychologists' quest for participation, inclusion, and policy change within the association and society of concern. All right, so the fathers of Black psychology, right? And here it is Joseph L. White over here to the right, Joseph L. White, and Robert L. Williams. So Joseph L. White is over here to the left, my bad, and Robert L. Williams is over here to the right. Okay. So if you want to look up more information, there go the title, there's the article, and it says Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology, 2009, volume 15, number 4, page 317 to 337. Okay, that's the title. So you can look up more information yourself. It's come from the American Psychological Association. There we go. All right. So, and then we're going to get into the concept about racism and mental health, the African American experience. Okay. So this does ties into the concept of psychology. It really does. Oh, Jesus. Jesus Christ. Okay, so real quick. We're going to look at Hmm. Okay, so we're gonna look at what it says institutional dimension of racism. It says negative attitudes and beliefs about minority racial population are not without consequences. Historically, beliefs about the inferiority of blacks have been actively translated into policies that restricted the access of African Americans to educational, employment, and residential opportunities. Arguably, the most dramatic example of this is the development and maintenance of racial residential segregation in the United States. Residential segregation was driven by beliefs of black inferiority and explicit desire to avoid social contact with this out group. Residential segregation in the United States also illustrates the institutional aspects of racism. The physical separation of the races was possible only because the cooperative efforts of major societal institutions, including the real estate industry, banking institution, and housing policies of the federal government. Hence, look up the redlining and why the redlining exists. All right. So, okay. So yeah, um, it says housing policies of the federal government. These institutional policy combined with the efforts of vigilant neighborhood organizations, and individual discrimination ensure that blacks were restricted in housing choice to least desirable residential areas. Okay. And then go on down. I'm gonna skip down. It's gonna say residential segregation has been a central mechanism by which racial inequality has been created and reinforced in the United States. Segregation has determined access to education and employment opportunity that has importantly led to socioeconomic mobility for blacks. In addition, segregation affects the quality of life of the community where African Americans reside. First, residential segregation has led to racial differences in the quality of elementary and high school education. In the United States, residents determines which public school students can attend, and the funding of the public education is under the control of local government. Thus, community resources importantly determine the quality of the neighborhood school. There is, oh, and by the way, this is what I found out. I just found out that zip code stand for zone in improvement planning. I didn't know that zip stand for zone improvement planning. That's interesting. All right, so it says in the United States, residents determine which public school students can attend, and the funding of public education is under the control of local government. Thus, community resources importantly determine the quality of neighborhood schools. This is a very strong relationship between residential segregation and the concentration of poverty. In the metropolitan Chicago, for example, the correlation between minority percentage and lower income percentage for elementary school was 0.90. Although there are millions of poor whites in the United States, poor white farm families tend to disperse throughout the community, with many residing in desirable residential areas. Accordingly, in 90% of predominantly white schools, the majority of students come from the middle class background. In contrast, public schools with a high proportion of blacks and Hispanics are dominated by poor children. 40 years after a unanimous Supreme Court rule in Brown versus Board of Education, the intentional segregation in school was inherently unequal and unconstitutional. Elementary and high school students in the United States is highly segregated and decidedly unequal. Okay, so this goes into the concept of racism and mental health, the African American experience. So this deals with psychology altogether, social science. All right, it was written in 2000, Ethnic and Health. Okay, and it's written by David R. Williams and Ruth Williams Morris. Department of Sociology, Institute for Social Research, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Department of Psychology, University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota, etc. So you can look that up too. All right. Up top it says racism and mental health, the African American experience, William, and then it says ethnic and health, August / November 2000, volume 5, a research library, and the page number is right here at the top. Okay. All right, then. So now, oops, did I make that mistake? Hold on. Okay, we'll bump it. Bump it. Okay, so let's look up Dr. Robert Williams, and he's going to explain why he did the concept called the bitch test 100. So let's look up Dr. Robert Williams. Okay, so this is an interview that Dr. William have done, and he explaining why he created the concept of the bitch test, which stand for Black Intelligence, testing cultural homogeneity or homogeny. All right, so let me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madison, the Black Eagle.
You know, I went back, Dr. Robert Williams, and thank you so much for coming on. I went back to an article written by John McGuire in 1977.
Okay.
Titled Professor Robert Williams has written an IQ test for blacks that isn't jive. And now I'm on Washington U's campus, and this is true. I'm going to read this paragraph. It says, at Washington University, Williams is sometimes called savior by grateful black students. I was one of them, one of those grateful black students. But many of his faculty colleagues take a harsher, they're writing in present tense, a harsher view of his Black intelligence test of cultural homogeneity. Williams has nicknamed it Black Intelligence Test Counterbalance for Hunkies or Bitch. They called me a separatist, saying I was really talking about lowering standards for blacks. He also received an anonymous letter saying the FBI had proof he was a communist. Boy, have we heard that before. How long has that been going on? Wow. But it says you grew up poor family out of Arkansas. Parents had no formal education, but you at that time refused to allow your 8 children to take standardized IQ tests. Why?
That's true. Why? Because I felt that there was cultural bias in there, and I knew that my kids were very bright and that they were not going to score well on the test because it was stacked. The questions were stacked against them. All of my kids went on to college, graduated, some with honors, 1 PhD, 3 MAs, 2 RNs, and they've just done well. And they didn't take IQ tests, so they didn't take standardized tests.
IQ test, again, what, for over 75 years?
At least.
At least 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
who was Arthur Jensen?
Arthur Jensen was a psychologist at the University of Berkeley who claimed that blacks were inferior to whites, that we not only inferior, that we were genetically inferior, that we had inferior genes with regards to intelligence. And he conducted a number of studies using IQ tests that were biased against blacks to prove, in quotes, that we were inferior. So that's why I developed the Black Intelligence Test to contradict his research, because people were beginning to believe that we were not as good as white folks.
And in terms of we pulled up some of the questions I think that we had, but does most of your studies, your theories, your premises, and your facts, would they apply today?
Sure.
Really?
But yeah, the same idea applies today. There are kids who are scoring low on IQ tests and are going on to high school, college, graduate school, and finishing with honors. In fact, one or two of my students were at the conference last week, and one of them is president of a California university, California State University, and did not score high on the IQ test. So and I was told that I had an IQ of 82, but I went on through college, graduated with honors, distinction in the field, got a master's from Wayne State, PhD from Washington University, the first African American to get a PhD in psychology from Washington University.
So why is it then that we have this still going on? I mean, with the books you've written, the studies that you've done, all the evidence to the contrary.
Well, let me tell you why it's still going on. You may have heard this story, but there was an African father reading stories to his son about man fighting a lion. And in the stories, the lion was described as being the king of the jungle. He was the fiercest and most agile animal in the jungle. But in the stories, the lion always lost to man. So the son asked his father one day, "Daddy, how is it that the lion can be the king of the jungle when he always loses?" The father said, "Son, man is writing those stories. When the lion learns to write, the endings will change." Mm-hmm. So it's the fact that the persons who are writing the stories and doing the research are doing it from their perspective, and they support what they believe. Now, when we write, we find a different results, and that's because we have a different perception of Black life, Black culture in this country.
In other words, a different perspective is based on all perspective is based on one's experience.
Exactly, and on one's philosophy and one's belief. If you believe that you are inferior, or if a group is inferior, your research will show that, because that's what you're set to prove, that particular hypothesis, and most of them prove it. But they use biased materials. For example, some of the questions that they ask are drawn from Eurocentric culture. Therefore, a Eurocentric answer is what they're looking for, and not a Black answer. Now, in my research, I showed that the tests were clearly biased. For example, I showed that in one test where there were three squirrels climbing a tree. One was shown at the base, one in the middle, and one at the top. Right. The question was, ask the child to point to the squirrel that is beginning to climb the tree. Now, many of my kids were missing that question because of the word beginning. So we changed it to point to the squirrel that is fixing to climb the tree.
Okay.
And all of the kids were able to get the question correctly.
Because culturally we know what fixing means.
Yes.
Yeah. And the one at the base was fixing to climb the tree.
Exactly. Or
All right. So what Dr. Williams have described is that as African American, we have a way of perceiving things, and what African descendant people, we have a way of perceiving things, especially in terms of life from a creative and from a lateral point of view. So it's not that we can't, come down to the same conclusion. It's just how we go about doing those experiment, and how we go about dealing with the subject matter to come up with the same conclusion. So it's just like you have somebody that speak German, and you got someone that's speaking French saying the same thing, right? So it's just that the person that's speaking French is using the French term, right? And the person that's speaking German is German, or that's fluent with German language, but it still come down to the same statement. That's just the way it is with African American and European American, is because our worldview, how we view things and how we go about doing. We use things in a more creative manner. Not say that Europeans are not creative people, but they tend to look at things from the concrete and look at it from a direct point of view and use linear thinking, whereas we are lateral and we see the abstract of things and be able to find a way to get around stuff. Yeah, so it's just a matter of more of creativity. That's all. It has nothing to do with the child inability to learn something or being able to comprehend or not, being educated. Just how the child be able to view things and how they are very creative. All right. So I'm gonna play one more video. I'm thinking, should I play one more video? Yeah, I'm gonna play one more video by Dr. Kobe Kaban. All right. Let's look at Dr. Kobe Kaban. Okay, Dr. Kobe Kaban. Whew, Jesus Christ. Whew. All right. Okay. So Dr. Kobe Kaban talks about power comes from culture. So I'm gonna play a little bit of this clip video right here. Power comes from culture. I'm gonna play a little bit. Or shall I play the African personality in America? Okay, I'm gonna play the first one, African personality in America. Let me see. No, let me see what is.
Power comes from culture. That's what.
Okay, so let's look at power comes from culture. All right, let's look that up right here. Yeah, all right, here we go.
Remember who was talking about. That's where power comes from. Power doesn't come from voting. Power doesn't come from, owning a store. Power comes from your being in control of your definition of reality, being defined by your history, you see, your philosophy, you see, your social reality. And from that, you understand the importance of owning the store, of owning the city, owning the state, owning the country, owning the world. You see, that only from that base. And I think that erroneous conception is running rampant in our community, is that we don't understand power because we don't understand culture. And I think that that's why we deny that we are cultural people. I mean, we'll have blood out here, serious and sincere about mounting a change. You see, out here on the battlefront, talking about liberating the African mind, and never mention our cultural reality, never even give any legitimacy to it. And so what happens then is that we're talking about liberating ourselves as black-skinned white people, not Adam people. And so we don't develop an African objective, you see, an African purpose, and therefore expect an African outcome for that. So I think that it's very important that this construct of culture orientation become an understandable one for us, because I think if it doesn't, we are going to continue to be walking around here like we have our heads cut off, trying to solve problems where the answers are right under our nose, and we're hiring somebody with a PhD or somebody else to go find it for us, and it's right there. And they going way out of town, look, you see, kind of thing, and charging you a lot of money to do it, you see, in that regard. So I think that, that this construct is very critical, I think, to getting us in a sense of that. Let me just say one more thing about it before I go on. That, you see, I think that one thing we have to recognize about our condition as African people is to be African under white supremacy domination is an unnatural situation. There's nothing natural about that. And African people must recognize that. But white domination, miseducation of African people, have us accepting that as possibly normal, a normal way of life or a natural way of life, that's okay. All we want to do is own a house, be able to have somebody on the city council, have something that ultimately is strictly white supremacy domination system. See, because if we're not out to destroy it, everything that we do is doing nothing more than reinforcing it. No matter how much we participate in it, and how much we think we can strain out of that participation, so long as we try to participate in it, we are giving legitimacy to it, and therefore we are in fact reinforcing its existence. So I think that we have to be very careful about this cultural orientation, because in the ranks of leadership among our people, that's where you find it most forcefully manifested. In the ranks of leadership among our, now it's everywhere, don't get me wrong, but it is very severely manifested in the ranks of leadership of African people, because they think they understand power. And even more absurdly, they think they understand white supremacy domination. And they are the biggest casualties of it, because they actually believe that they can achieve African liberation by working through a structure that white supremacy domination creates. And not only will they try to convince us of the legitimacy of that, they will try to bring punishing consequences to bear upon us if we don't comply. Whether it's through name calling, withdrawing social status and social recognition from us, and that can go in all kinds of ways, in concrete ways like fire you, lose your job, all kinds of other things, you see, so that we will get our African selves in line with white supremacy domination. So I think that's I call this book a wake-up call for the African world, because I think that we're just like drug addicts. I think we are addicted to the European worldview, and withdrawal is a very challenging process. It is a very challenging process. If you know anything about addiction, it takes all the energy you got, you see, to try to and get out of that, to get out from under the weight, you see, of that addiction. And you will come up with every justification and rationalization you can, you see, to in fact reinforce it. I often use this analogy. I've been been fortunate enough, I guess, to be involved in the more progressive wings of this liberation movement for the last 20 years. And I've tried to be a keen.
All right, so that was Dr. Kobe Kaban speaking of how culture is very important. So if you understand, if you want to deal with the psychology of Black people, and particularly in America, you have to understand the cultural aspect of things because, as I mentioned before, that we are very creative people and we're very lateral. So once you understand the cultural of the ancestors who came before us, then you'll be able to understand how we incorporate their culture influences in this American society. So, with that being the case, we have been highly domesticated, right, in this American culture uh, through the ideology of Westerns. But in order for us to be able to blend into society, that's where the concept of cultural homogeneity come in. It's like, let me better explain this. It's like this, okay. Let's say you want to make a red velvet cake, but you want to get the ingredients, the recipe for that red velvet cake. But in that ingredients, there's some things that you don't like, right? So you want to be able to, you're going to either one, substitute, or two, you're going to add on to it to be able to fit your taste bud, to give it its flavor, right? To give it, to be into your liking. That's what we have done with the Western culture. So we couldn't take the Western culture for what it was. We had to just add a little flavor to it. We had to add on or we had to substitute in order for us to fully adapt into this society. That's how you got the hip hop music. That's how you got blues. This is how you got the style of dress. You got the slang and all that because it's like it doesn't do us any good to just speak standard English. We have to incorporate Ebonics, which is the African native tongue, or the tone to mix in. That's why when you hear us here in the South, we talk very different. We have what's called a condensed pronunciation. Condensed pronunciation means that we don't fully articulate or pronunciate our words all the way clear. So it's kind of like a lazy pronunciation. So we had to incorporate that in order for us to be able to blend in. So we use Ebonics in order to communicate with each other and be able to have some form of communication, interaction. So that's the culture behind it. So I want to show you guys some books that deals with African psychology or Africana psychology, Black psychology. So if you haven't got the books, you need to get them. This book right here is called The Community of Self, revised by Dr. Naeem Akbar. This is the book. And then we got another book by Dr. Naeem Akbar, which is called Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. All right. And he was a clinical psychologist. Okay. Then here's another book by Dr. Amos Wilson, right? It's called The African Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order. And give me one moment. All right, so this book is called African Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order by Dr. Amos Wilson, Garveyism in the Age of Globalism. It's basically, actually, it was a lecture. So it was a lecture that was turned into a book. So Dr. Amos Wilson really, he's very deep. So you have to be very open-minded because he deals with a lot of critical analysis and he gets you to think things on a very deep level. So Dr. Amos, this book right here, which is one of the most popular book, which is called Breaking the Curse of Willie Lynch. and it was written by Alvin Morrow. It deals with the science of slave psychology, so it helps you to understand psychology in itself. So right here, yep, and you can see the book is still fairly new. Let me see when this book was written. All right, so this book was written in 2003, but it's a good book. So it actually explained the slave mentality that we have as a people and how slavery has affected us over so many years. All right. This book right here deals with another psychologist. His name is Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum. Roots of ancient mysticism and modern psychology, the African unconscious. Okay. All right. So he deals with the body, mind, and spirit, religion, and spirituality. And it was published in 1999. So, you guys need to check this book out. Good book. Yep. Yeah, he himself is a clinical psychologist. And this happens to be one of my personal favorites. I used to read this book, and I'm going to reread it. It is called Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin Serpent Power, and the Luminous Matrix of Reality. And this was written by Dr. Edward Bynum. Okay, as well. And so this book had to be written around I want to say this book was written around 2012. Yeah, it was written in 2012. So I read this book. It was a pretty good book. It was very eye-opening. Yep. So, anyways, I'm gonna post them up on Facebook if you're watching from Facebook. But I'm gonna go ahead and log off of here because I want to thank you guys for watching and tuning in. So with that being said, please be safe. May peace and power elevation be to all of you. And until next time, take it easy. And tune in when I do the daily Black history. All right. All right then. Thank you. Peace. All right.